Step into the shadows with Paranormal M, where reality slips and the strange takes hold. Each episode dives into the unsettling, unknown haunted places, mysterious encounters, and chilling whispers from beyond. Subscribe now and ring the bell, so you never miss a moment when the darkness speaks. Unexplainable things that has happened to me and my kids. So a little background information before I get into this. I had a stepdad that really liked to make me scared. And at a young age, we would have played with Ouija boards with him, and I would be terrified. Growing up through the years, he would continue with the ghost stuff and ask me if I can see or hear the quote-unquote little boy. Pretty sure he was just crazy. Anyways, something ended up happening to me that I cannot explain. My mom eventually divorced him after years of abuse of, us, drugs, and alcohol. I was 18 years old, and we moved out on our own with my mom after 15 years of being with this person. The house was pretty old, and it was in a rough neighborhood and with a lot of crime. There was places in the house with electricals being all messed up and doors being messed up and rooms where something was fixed. It would soon break down again. But that was all we could really do at the time. My mom was single, working 2 jobs. My brother and I were still in high school trying to get through it. Life definitely got a little crazy. But anyways, things are written on the walls, even like, "This house is haunted," and literally a pentagram on the wall in the bedroom I was sleeping in. Sheesh. But like I said, it was the best we could do at the time. A little bit of primer. Within the first week of moving in, I was very sick. Couldn't lift my head, I was so dizzy. We couldn't find out what was wrong. We even looked for a gas leak. I felt so strange being in that house, and I'm still not convinced that going through all of that stuff with my stepdad when I was young didn't mess me up. In maybe a lot of different ways. I was always terrified of the dark and had nightmares and all those things. Stuff continued to get weirder, though. I eventually started to feel better, but when I would shower, there was a closet that I always felt like someone was just sitting in there watching me. I would come home and my closet door would be open. I even put things up against it. I'd come home and the stuff would be moved and the door opened again. Once I was doing the dishes and a glass cake pan flew off the wall across the kitchen. The only place in the house that I actually felt okay in was the living room for whatever reason. The last thing that happened is what really had me confused. One night my boyfriend at the time was dropping me off at home. The driveway was on the side of the house, and the side my bedroom was on. My curtains in my room were see-through. I decided for whatever reason that night to look up. When I looked up, I saw a perfectly round circle, like a black mass in my window. I asked my boyfriend at the time if he saw it too. You could tell he didn't want to freak me out about it and was kind of like, "Yeah, I do." I had him walk me up to my room, and I was so scared it wasn't there anymore, and I never saw it again. There were some nights that I would feel like my feet were being pulled almost. We also had 2 cats and a dog. One of my cats disappeared, and we never saw him again. I'm sure he got out, but it was still just a weird occurrence. But my dog didn't really like it there either. He would hide at my feet. We didn't live there much longer after that happened. But that is the scariest thing that's happened to me, at least so far to this day. I do have kids now, and they see things and tell me about it, and it is crazy. One of the things my son used to see is what he called the skeleton man. He would look at him through the windows outside my mom's house when we moved in with him after my divorce. He also saw an old man in her bedroom. My mom explained to me that the bedroom we were staying in was the same room that an old man had passed in. After we moved out of my mom's, he only saw the old man one more time in my bedroom in my apartment. He said, "Mommy, why is there an old man right there?" That was the last I heard of the old man. He also pointed to the sky and repeated, he's coming, when he was 2 years old. Now, we live in a house that's 150 years old with my long-term boyfriend. My daughter claims to see a person outside her room every night tapping their foot. She said it's a green foot. She also saw a man peeking his head out of their bathroom a few weeks ago. She most recently told me that she doesn't look out of her window because when she does, there's a person with a hoodie with no arms that runs out to her back door. It is hard to believe her, though. She's a good storyteller. But she's scared of the foot that she sees. Hey, a hallmark of a good storyteller is having real stories. Well, to me. Knocking on the window. First of all, I live about half an hour away from a small town, a few hours away from the city. Also, I live on a pretty secluded road, and I know my few neighbors as their distant cousins. My closest neighbor I know fairly well. I doubt they'd be the ones knocking. They have good lives of their own. Anyways, for the past week or even more, I've been hearing knocking on my window specifically. It's always after the sun goes down. At least, that's what I find. But just a few minutes ago, I heard it again, which is why I'm making this post. Right now it's 7:43 p.m. and my bedroom's on the bottom floor and my house is surrounded by forest. I doubt it's an animal, and if it was, they would have been pretty persistent and rather large. My window is fairly high up and I'm almost 5'2", and all I have to do is reach my hand up to touch the bottom part of my window. To describe the knocks, they're fast. They're not hard at all. It's also not very gentle either. Just enough to let me know that whatever's on the other side is there. I don't ever open my curtain. What's the point? Ignorant is bliss. Also, I just don't want to know what's there. One of these days, maybe I'll gather the courage to look, but I doubt it. Also, the knocks never come in threes. I say this specifically because I think some people say 3 knocks are like ghosts or some devil shit. I'm just clarifying that it isn't 3, I'd say 4 or 5, but 4 sounds too short. The knocks are longer than that, and yeah, they're quick, but when I try to recreate it, 5 sounds more fitting. Oh no, never mind, just happened again. 7:50 p.m. Slow and in 3. Not disturbingly slow, but slower. Honestly, don't know what to make of this. Maybe somebody else out there will have some sort of an idea as to what this means. I am pretty skeptical, and this will probably just be another thing that I'll ignore. But I'm curious, I guess. The voice. I was 16, my father was on a business trip. So my mom let me in their bedroom, kick back on their waterbed and watch TV while she and my sister watched TV in the living room. I had a bowl of popcorn. I was watching a program, happily munching away. Suddenly it felt that it was like all sound was removed from the room, almost. It's hard to explain well, but it was as if a vacuum sucked out every existing sound of that particular moment. The television, the underlying hum of the furnace, and all the way the air flows over your ears. And then in my right ear, I heard these words spoken. "Excuse me, Kim." Now, I can't tell you if the sound of the voice was that of a male or a female. I just can't. The voice was clear and it was strong, but that's it. I froze in place, my heart began to pound. I remember clutching my bowl of popcorn. And again, the same voice, same sound, same words in my ear. "Excuse me, Kim." However, I gained a severe blast of adrenaline and shot up from the waterbed and leapt across it. My foot jammed down between the water mattress and the wood frame and nearly snapped my leg in two at the shin. The bowl of popcorn flew out of my hand, and the memory of the metal bowl and the popcorn kernels flying all over the room is still very clear in my mind. It seemed to be flying in slow motion. I've been told that it's an effective like an adrenaline rush. I flew out of the bedroom and raced out to my mother and sister crying hysterically. Now, this is one of the few incidents that happened in that particular house, and I'll share more if anybody wants to hear them. And by the way, my name is Kim. (1970s) unexplained and possible haunting. In the 1970s, I lived in what I believe to have been a haunted house. It was widely known in the town our family had just moved to. I learned this later to be haunted, and in fact the person or people that had been living in it before us supposedly moved out because he was having problems with frightening incidents in the home. Of course, our parents didn't tell myself or my little sister this information. They believed we were young and rather impressionable. They didn't want to scare us, nor did they want to blow things out of proportion. They didn't even have to tell us, especially not me. I figured it out rather quickly on my own. My first experience that I couldn't explain happened on a bright weekday in the afternoon. My sister and I were latchkey kids as our parents both worked. And at this time, my sister was 6 years old and I was 11. We rode the school bus home and went inside to have a snack and do our chores. Once done, my sister went to the neighborhood girls' house to play. I decided to take a shower. I was completely alone in the house. It was an old home built back in the early 1900s. I do believe maybe the very late 1800s, actually. I recently saw an image of the house that was taken in 1901, so I'm really not quite sure of the exact age. It was large and it was 3 stories high. Upstairs held the bathroom and 3 bedrooms. Above, through a door in the ceiling in the bathroom, an attic. I climbed into the shower and began washing off the dust and grime from a long day at school. I was lost in thought, as one often is in the shower. I was scrubbing my hair with Prel, and suddenly, there was a loud knock at the bathroom door. 3 knocks. Startled, I said, "What? I'm in the shower." I was annoyed because I was pretty sure that it must be my little sister having come in from outside to use the bathroom. But there was no answer, so what the heck? I ignored the issue. I continued to wash my hair, and after a minute or so, just as I began to rinse, 3 more knocks. Another loud knocking at the door. I jumped, my eyes were full of soap bubbles, and I was now irritated. "Nicole!" I yelled. "What the heck do you want? I'm in the shower." I strained to hear my sister through the bathroom door, but there was no answer and no sound. It felt to me, though, like someone was listening. "Quit screwing around," I said. I quickly rinsed off. I left the shower running and very carefully stepped outside the curtain, making sure not to alert anybody who might be listening. I wrapped a towel around me and waited to catch whoever was out there. I stood right at the door, my hand poised to grab the knob. I stood there for some time, and yeah, you guessed it, nothing happened. Sort of grumbled to myself, climbed back into the shower. The very second the water hit my face, there was the knock at the door. 3 knocks. This time the knocks were clearly deliberate. How did whomever know I had climbed back into the shower? This was weird now, and I knew it. I turned the shower water off and I yelled, "Who is it?" The second the last word tumbled out of my mouth, 3 knocks. It was like in one motion I pulled the curtain around me and leaned out of the tub, gripped the doorknob, and yanked the door open. The door was literally right next to the bathtub. There was no one there, no one. No giggling little sister who was interested in really playing with elaborate pranks, and she was only 6 after all. I wound up throwing on my robe, ran into my parents' room, and looked around. Then my bedroom, then my sister's next. No one was upstairs with me. I would have heard and seen anyone on the stairs. They were old, and they creaked terribly. I was suddenly scared. Something had been knocking on the door, and whatever it was, it wanted my attention. Suffice to say, it got my attention. I quickly made my way downstairs, and as I passed the window on the landing, I saw my sister and her little friend playing Barbies on the porch outdoors. It hadn't been my sister. This, as I said, was my first experience I had in that house. There were several others in that house, one of which could have killed my sister. Banging for our attention. Backstory. When I, a 28-year-old female, was younger, 7 years old, my parents and I lived with my mother's parents. Both grandparents alive and healthy, with my mom, 2 other sisters, so you can imagine the house was always busy. We've always lived as a multi-generational family. It's a custom in our culture. When I was much younger, we lived in a very lively 4-bedroom, 2-story home. My 2 aunts were in their 20s and had tons of friends. My parents had me young, so they were in the same boat. My grandparents were typical. Dad worked, Mom stayed home. So you can imagine the way our house was. People were constantly coming and going. Phones were always ringing, and somebody was always home. We had this custom where we kept our family phone in the main living room. It was on the same wall that held the stairs to the upstairs bedrooms. It was right next to the kitchen, visible from both living areas, and just right off from the garage. That way it was easily accessible no matter where you were in the house. If somebody called for another person and they were upstairs, we'd bang on the staircase wall so the whole house could hear somebody had a phone call. It was a normal occurrence for us, just banging on the wall since everybody was so young and constantly receiving phone calls. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and my grandpa passed away when I was 9. It was really hard because he was my favorite person. He took care of the family. My grandma was a stay-at-home type and pretty much her entire life, so she really wasn't prepared well enough to take over finances, bills, or just life itself without my grandpa. Unfortunately, she ended up losing the home due to some bad financial decisions and had to move in with my aunt across town. It wasn't fortunate, but at least my grandma had a place to go. She packed up her sentimental belongings and sold the rest and moved in with my aunt, who was thankful for this. She had just had a baby and needed some help. My grandma stayed with this aunt in San Diego, California for years and helped her raise her second baby before my aunt's husband got orders from the military that he was being stationed in Japan. For a while, it was difficult trying to find a place for my grandma to stay as extended family. It's not really allowed on base in Japan. They only really allowed immediate family, especially because my grandmother was now in her mid-70s. My other aunt didn't have the space, and another aunt unfortunately had drug issues and couldn't hold down a permanent residence longer than about a month. We all agreed that her only option was to move to Las Vegas. Whoa. That's where my mom had the space and the income to take care of my grandma. My grandma wasn't too happy as she'd never lived anywhere except San Diego, but she really didn't have a choice. A few months go by and we're now ready to move to my grandma, or rather, move my grandma. That way my aunt can pack up her place and sell it and get out of town. My family and I made a trip down to San Diego to get my grandma, move her and say her goodbyes to my auntie. At this point, my grandma's fully moved into my mom's home. That's where she's sleeping upstairs in one of my brothers, which were twins, 12 years old, room. At least for the time being. She was waiting for my bedroom, which was downstairs with a private bathroom, to become available. My husband and I just started dating back then, and we decided to move in together for fun since this kind of gave me an excuse to be nice and spend more time with him. My grandma had been in Las Vegas for about 4 days now. Still getting adjusted, but she enjoyed it because, well, her casino was now a 10-minute drive. One night my husband and I had just come back home to my parents' home at 2 a.m. We were just getting back from going out. We stopped to get some food and ate at my mom's kitchen. We're talking and laughing in sort of a whispered tone because my mom's house was sort of, well, tile, and it was 2 a.m., so we didn't want to wake anyone up. A few minutes go by, and I hear a loud banging coming from the kitchen wall. That's where my bathroom and bedroom is, on the opposite side. So I figured, okay, my brothers must be awake in my room because they always played video games on my computer. Went to go into my room and lights were off. Room was still. Nothing was happening. We shrugged it off and considered that maybe it came from upstairs where my parents' bedroom was. Maybe they dropped something, or it came from my brother's room and they were playing rough as they always did. A couple of minutes go by. The banging starts again. This time we were certain it came from the kitchen wall. I looked at my husband and told him to quit messing with me and making so much noise. I told him he's kicking the floor or something. He stood up and yelled, "I'm not doing anything." The banging started again. It was 3 loud bangs on the kitchen wall. Freaked out, I looked at him and said, "Okay, if it's not you, it has to be something from upstairs." So, he and I went upstairs, turned on some of the lights and saw the loft was empty. We checked my parents' room, they're both sleeping and snoring. I checked my brother's and grandma's room in fear that she fell and needed us, but her lights were off, and she was sleeping too. Then I got mad, and I was so sure it was my brother's. Went to their room and saw the light off. They were notorious for fake sleeping, so I went in and tried to shake them awake and even lightly poked their tummy. They're ticklish. So that way they would have woken up, but nope, they were out cold too. My husband and I are freaking out at this point, decided to go back downstairs and finish what's left of our food and go to bed. Got back to the kitchen, and the banging happened again in 3 quick but loud bangs. We had enough, so we threw our food in the trash, left, and went to his parents for the night. On the way there, I openly joked about how my grandma must have just followed, or rather, grandpa must have followed my grandma here and told us to go to bed. But now, several years later, I'm certain he was there and checking out my grandma to make sure she's comfortable, and saw us up way too late at night. It must have been his only way to get her attention, just like how he did when he was alive. Who did I just see? The Thing. A few months ago, I started seeing this thing in my lounge room. It was the shape of a really tall person, but lacked any distinguishing shape, so sort of like looking through clear contacts. I'd see it in the same few spots in my lounge room, but it's preferred to hang out in the front of the fridge or in this one spot near my front door. I have a fuse box on the wall right next to where I'd see it near my front door, and it liked being near the fridge, so maybe it has something to do with the electricity, just a thought. I stopped seeing whatever this thing was about a month ago, but that's not to say that things have been normal. The alarm. Last month, I was woken at 12:52 a.m. by an alarm going off in my lounge room. Annoying as fuck considering I'm disabled, so I couldn't get out of bed to investigate. Thank flip I keep my ears plugs with me at night in case my cat wants to be a meowy little turd and wake me up. Highly recommend to anybody with a vocal pet. This alarm kept going off every night at 12:52 a.m. until the source of the beeping was discovered. My digital clock alarm had been set to that time, but it wasn't me that did it. I don't even know how to, and I hadn't touched it since daylight savings, which was months ago. But that's not the weird part. That afternoon, I got a message on Facebook regarding a friend I've known since high school. He died that night at 12:52 a.m. from cancer at the age of 33. A few people have pointed out the significance to the number 3. His birthday is August 23rd, if that means anything. What happened today? My disability, C4-5, incomplete quadriplegic, limits a lot of things I can do. I don't and can't drive, and I rely on a power wheelchair to get around town. I go downtown a few days a week to go get groceries or socialize or add to my ever-growing list of art supplies. I was about halfway down to downtown when a friend who I'm going to call Beck, they FaceTimed me. We hadn't chatted for a while, so her call was a nice surprise. Chatted for a bit, and I can hold my phone up and drive my power chair at the same time because I'm good at multitasking. That was before I saw this guy walking toward me. I should also mention that I have poor self-esteem and bad social anxiety, so what I did was mostly out of bravery and sort of showing off to my Beck. Sort of maybe even stirred on by having an audience to show off to, really, and I'm 31 and he looked to be in his mid-20s. This man was, no joke, the most attractive being I think I've ever laid eyes on. I'm talking I can't say these names, Ian Somerhalder. Ryan Reynolds, Zac Efron, and Taylor Lautner in one person. Sorry. He had what looked like a phone in his hand, and he was wearing jeans and a casual shirt. It's winter here, so what he was wearing was out of place, and he was walking in my direction tripping over myself now. And as our paths were about to cross, I blurted out, "What's cooking, good looking? Original, I know." He looked up in what looked like genuine surprise and mumbled something I didn't even catch. Beck asked who I was talking to, so I held up my phone so she could see him as he went past. But there was no one there, and when we looked on the screen or anywhere else, turned my chair around in case he'd stopped, but the whole footpath was empty. There's nowhere for him to go. Just an empty footpath on the side of the building that has no doors. I thought that story was going to go very differently. The house in the mountains. Was it a ghost? I recently wrote about a maybe haunted house I lived in when I was a kid, in the strange encounters that occurred when we lived there. Recent events and recovery of some repressed memories of things that occurred in that house sort of got me thinking about a few things. Things I may have overlooked before now. Some of the memories that have resurfaced recently aren't ones that happened in the house that was supposedly haunted, but in an old farmhouse a few hours' drive that my dad purchased for visitation purposes after my parents' separation. Some of the memories I've gotten back are like tiny sections added to the memories I already had, completing the memory but altering the scene entirely. Thus, the reason for my retelling of these events. Me and my siblings moved around a lot with our mom growing up, due to my parents separating and the bitter non-divorce and custody dispute of me and my two siblings. They almost got married, but didn't happen, so Dad dodged a big bullet there. When I was 2, Mom was still pregnant with my sister, we moved to a small town with a population of about 800. Please read my previous post regarding the strange things that happened in that house. The weird things that happened to that house that we lived at with our mom only started after our dad purchased an old farmhouse a few hours' drive from where me, my mom, and my two siblings were living at the time. Deja. We lived with our mom, but spent the occasional weekend with Dad at his house on the farm. My dad owned that house from when I was 3 until about 9, when I was maybe 5 or 6. That's when the events of this story took place. This farm was high up in the mountains, extremely isolated and aptly named Mount Hopeless. Damn, it's in Victoria if you want to see it yourself. The 20-minute drive from the closest town took us on a swervy dirt road, driving through thick vegetation and massive gum trees as far as the eyes could see, with the occasional clearing that looked out to valleys, kangaroos, and more bush. And to top off the already spooky vibe of the area, we'd pass Crazy Mary's house to get to Dad's farm. She was a hermit, lived in a rundown house in the mountains who mostly kept to herself. Although the locals at the time knew to stay away from her, picture Eleanor Abernathy throwing cats at you. That's what she looked like. Ratty black hair that hadn't met a comb in years. Clothes that looked like they were close to calcification and dirt adorning her face. She had some feral cats that she fed and lived on her own. I might have seen somebody else near her house a few times, but I was a kid, so I can't be sure. But we didn't have much to do with her, except for the time when our cats stalled outside her house on the bend in the road. Gotta add some oil. But we got out before she had a chance to throw cats at us. The farm was near the end of the road, with a gate at the end of the road that belonged to the neighbor in the next property. It was a long dirt road and a clearing, with a fence running the length of the clearing on the left and the view of Dad's house as we entered the clearing. I remember there was a really old and run-down house on the right. It was complete with a water tank rusted to shreds by age and abandonment. There's no fence visible from what I can recall, but I do remember how unsettled it made me feel. Spooky cabin in the woods vibe. Whole area did, if I'm being completely honest. At the end of the road was the gate that led to the house. Oh, when I say it was an old house, I mean it was old. Look up old Australian farmhouses to get an idea what it looked like. It was on 100 acres of farmland, very discluded from the rest of the world. It had the front veranda that spanned the length of the house with 2 large windows on either side of the front door and a big brick chimney sprouting out of the side of the house. At the back of the house were stairs. They led up to the back veranda and the outside of the house, or rather the outside on the left as you reached the top, which I hated going into. Picture sitting on a frozen wood slab at the top of a poo pit with spiders everywhere. No, thank you. As you go inside the house, you see a large wood table in the kitchen to your right, an open sunroom of sorts on your left with bunk beds that we slept in when we visited, and along the far right was the biggest wood stove fireplace I've ever seen. Had a chimney big enough for Santa's yearly visits. Well, that's good. Down the short hall between the kitchen and the sunroom were 2 rooms. My dad's room on the right and the spare room on the left. I can't recall why, but I didn't sleep in that spare room. But come to think of it, I don't remember much about that room. The only memory I have in there is opening a cupboard and there was a live bat inside. Fun times. The Boogeyman. I was about 4 or 5 when I first started seeing what I referred to as the Boogeyman. Took my afternoon nap in Dad's room because it was away from the kitchen and rather quiet. One day during my nap, I was woken up by the feeling of being watched. It only felt like seconds since I'd fallen asleep before I was woken by this feeling. Opening my eyes in the fog of sleep, I saw what looked like my brother standing at the door with what looked like a sheet over his head. I told him to go away, but my demand got no response. He just stood there staring at me. My complaints to my parents fell on deaf ears, though. They'd always tell me that he was out on the farm. I always chalked this up to my brother being a turd, just trying to scare me. The never-ending sibling torment, that's the job description of being a sibling, really. That's what I thought, too, until the rest of that memory came to light. One day during my nap, I was woken up to the familiar feeling of being gaped at. And by this point, I'd had enough. I stomped out of bed as fast as I could and ran for where my brother was standing. Only he wasn't there anymore. Looked down the hall, and there was no one there. The front door was closed, and the house felt empty. Not the way it felt seconds prior. It's like it just vanished. I abandoned my nap to head outside in search of where my brother went, but what I saw when I went outside stopped me in my tracks. My brother was up near the chook pen, nowhere near the house. If that wasn't him, then who the hell was it that I saw? The other part of the memory that has resurfaced is what this thing looked like. In my young mind, I always saw my brother with a sheet over his head. I guess that's what my mind created to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like a person, but it was white and semi-transparent and had a feeling of aliveness to it. I don't know what it was or why it watched me sleep. The creaking floorboards. It's natural for an old house to creak and move with the wind, but the noises that came out of that house at night were unsettling, to say the least. During the night, I would hear noises like somebody walking on the floor, but at random intervals. The areas of the house, it's like things were happening simultaneously. An audible creak coming from the kitchen, followed by what sounded like a creak coming from the spare room. Then back to the kitchen. But there was nobody there ever. My dad was just snoring away happily in his room, and I could hear the top bunk springs creaking. Definitely wasn't my brother either then. My sister, by the way, was too young to stay at the farm unsupervised, so she didn't stay there very often. The things that happened in that house were tame in comparison to some of the weird things that happened at the house we lived at with Mom. But the timeline of events and recent memories have me thinking, could a spirit have followed us to the other house? I'm still not 100% sure what it was that I saw, and this happened about 25 years ago. Could be remembering it wrong, or maybe I created an imaginary friend. I'm a skeptic, though, and through too, and regardless of what I think I saw as a kid, so what's your take? An overactive imagination or something more? Since I still have a fever, I have the urge to say it again. Veranda, San Diego. Who was knocking? I was at the bed on my phone listening to music. I was basically the only person home because Mom was buying groceries or something, and my little brother, that we're going to call Alex, was at our cousin's place having fun. Before I get to the story, you have to know the layout of the place. Our bedroom, where I was, had a wooden door to our balcony. And at the balcony, our cousin's window is close to it. So whenever we wanted to go to their place, we just used their window as a shortcut to go there instead of walking outside and getting to their front door. Note, it wasn't dangerous. The window was big enough for an adult man to squeeze through, so it wasn't hard for most to come in. Your aunt made accommodations for us, at least whenever we would say we wanted to come in, so we didn't get into an accident. On with the story. Like I said, I was on my phone listening to my music. I had my headphones plugged in because I could practically hear my brother and my cousins laughing, just being loud. I don't know when it started, but in the middle of my music I could hear this beat, otherwise known as the knocks. I forgot to say that the wooden door has a lock that can only be opened inside the bedroom, so whenever Alex got locked at the balcony, he'd knock and call my name. Well, I didn't hear my name getting called, so I thought it was just weird beat in the music. But then minutes later, it was still there. Now I started doubting if it was music, because it didn't fit the rhythm at all. So I paused and listened, and it continued. The knock was unlike Alex's knock, and it was more like an annoyed, loud knocking and yelling my name with irritation. This one was consistent. I don't know how to say it, but it was a weird kind of knock, and ever since then, from the start, it didn't change its pace. The sound basically was the opposite of his, and I thought it was Alex, so I waited for him to call. Eventually, I just got annoyed and got out of bed and opened the lock, which makes a loud clicking sound when opened. But the knock didn't stop, so I opened the door while saying, "What the heck, Alex is knocking, what do you know?" The moment I opened the door, the knocking stopped. At first, I was confused because the knocking stopped the moment I opened the door. Our aunt looked through the window and said, "Alex is right here, I think." At first, I thought they were pranking me, But even before Aunt denied it, I knew it wasn't true. First of all, yes, the window was close, but not that close that you'd get in there within a nanosecond. And the knocking was just so consistent, never changing, very unlike Alex's. Aunt's reply was, "Promise we didn't prank you. Nobody went to go knock at your door either." When I was 8 years old, something grabbed my leg and tried to get up. When I was 8 years old, my family, being my father, my mother, and my sister, were going through a difficult economic situation. Therefore, we lived in a rental house. It wasn't bad. The bad thing was that there was an abandoned house just opposite of it. There was the door, and if you went to a path to the right, it was the exit to the street. But to the left, you entered an alley between our house and an abandoned house in a very bad condition. That house was literally falling. It was made of a rock-like material, but maybe a little bit stronger. My sister and I went there to see what we found. But our parents told us to be careful, since in the quote-unquote living room of that house, there was a big hole that was a noria. That was a noria. And from what we had heard, the people who'd lived there since, their children had fallen there. We could never really check if it was true or not, but something strange happened in both houses. On one occasion before the title happened, I remember seeing a girl jumping in the middle of the living room of my house, and while at night and everyone was sleeping, I was unlucky that my bed was right in the front of the front door that led to the living room, and since we were not well enough economically, we turned off all of the lights when sleeping. It was quite scary, and the only logical explanation I give is that with so much fear that I may be imagined. One night, already almost a year before we left that house, I remember that I was asleep in bed, or trying to sleep. I was in that position when your legs are hanging out of the bed, so I feel something grab my foot and raises. I move, and quote-unquote it drops. I get angry, and I see my sister at the door and immediately think it was her. I start to ask her why she did that, and she just says, "Do what?" My sister had a computer with a webcam, and just at that moment she left it on recording a video in that room. When we reviewed it, I could see how nobody took my leg. Simply, the leg rose alone. But I felt that somebody took it. It's something to which today I cannot explain. Glad they returned it. My dead dad is haunting my mom. Backstory. My dad passed away in 2015. He was 64, so not super young, but it was a shock to us all because all four of my grandparents are still alive and well. We obviously didn't expect for him to die before them. So my mom says that she felt like she was, or rather he, was still around, and still around the house after he died. She would see shadows, hear footsteps. Kind of chalked it up to her just being alone now in a house where they used to be together. I didn't live there at the time, but did live there a couple of years later in 2017, mid-2019. In 2017, her father, my grandpa, died as well. Overall, she does believe in spirits and ghosts, and used to be quite Christian. She's had paranormal experiences and pretty open-minded and realistic. Her first guess isn't always like, "Oh, ghost." She tried to figure it out logically before going to any paranormal conclusions as to not freak herself out. The experience. In late 2018, in the time I was living with her, I had a boyfriend whose house I would stay at a few times a week. As you do. She said that one night when I wasn't there, she woke up in the middle of the night because she felt something was watching her. She opened her eyes and recalls a large, shadowy face. Didn't have super defined features, but like a floating egg head with indents for eyes. No body. She flung herself out of bed, screaming, and threw a chair at it, scaring the shit out of my dog and cat who sleep in the bed with her. I don't know if they sensed anything. I don't think she can remember, except she screamed and got up and they jumped too and disappeared into thin air. She turned on the lights and waited, but eventually fell back asleep. I don't know how she fell asleep after something like that. The next night she woke up again in the middle of the night, but this time to a glowing white orb above her in bed. She says it was the size of a pomelo. She again got scared and started screaming and kind of flailing her arms. The orb floated slowly out of the room, unlike the face that just sort of dissipated. When I came home a couple of days later, she told me what happened. I immediately was freaked out and also confused. What are these two things doing? Battling dark versus light? And so we went to a Bruges shop and got crystals. Yep, we like crystals and we believe in energy and all that. She said things subsided for a while, but one night, again as I was away for the night, she was getting ready for bed. She said she felt a need to turn around while brushing her teeth, so that way she was facing the bedroom. When she turned, she saw a blurry gray man run and jump into the bed, like diving into a pool. Disappeared into it. She said it didn't feel very malicious, and she was spooked, but still went to bed. The next day, she told me about the third experience, and I freaked. I'm telling her to get a shaman in this house quick, especially as I'm set to be moving out of her house and kind of far away. So now she's going to be alone? No, not on my watch. She's done some work with this particular shaman before, so the shaman knows us and our family quite a bit. She does some Reiki work as well over my mom, gives her instructions on how to proceed and get the spirits out of her house. I do this ritual with her, and so far she hasn't had any more spirits around her room at night. Sometimes, the shaman said to her, though, has stuck with me ever since. My first guess, when thinking about the entities coming to my mom at night, is that it was my dad. First black shadowy face. And then my grandpa, her dad, as the glowing orb. My dad and grandpa didn't really get along. My grandpa was very protective of my mom and never thought my dad was the best man for her. But then I'm thinking, why would my dad be a dark, shadowy face? That unfortunately makes sense, even though I wouldn't like it to. He was a difficult man, and his opinion was going to finish life too soon. He wasn't ready to go. But let's go back to the shaman. She practices some past life guided meditations, and in her Reiki work with my mom told her that my dad was essentially stuck to her. Why? Because they had many past lives together. Cute, right? No, fuck no. Apparently, in every past life before this one, he had outlived her. The shaman said he had basically done anything to remain the survivor. So, killed her, let her die. The shaman said that she saw it all there, and that he couldn't let go of my mom in this life because he was pissed that he went first. Yikes. I honestly wish I could be like, no, that's crazy. Dad wouldn't kill Mom or hurt her or haunt her, but the fucked part is that I can totally see it. Makes sense to me. Hurts my heart to admit that, but I can see that my dad being somebody who puts himself before everyone else, he didn't really think he deserved to die. He even admitted once to my mom, as she was taking care of him throughout his sickness, that if the tables were turned, he probably wouldn't have stuck around to take care of her. Something listening to my friend and I in the middle of the woods at night. Me and my friend, both 17, were on a holiday at a resort in Norwich, which is situated in a pretty large forest. I'd been there once before, about 5 or so years ago, and on that trip I discovered a small dirt path that led to an uninhabited part of the woods. I was too scared to go very far down when I first discovered it and sort of forgot about it. Fast forward to about 3 days ago, and me and my friend are bored and have like an hour to kill. It's about 9 at this point. I decide that I would have maybe some fun and go on an evening cycle in the woods. My friend is a very skeptical person and a logical person who isn't a fan of taking risks, so she needed some convincing. But eventually we went. The path took us deep into the forest, so far that we could no longer see any of the lights from the houses around us. It also bordered some kind of field. However, this field was blocked off by a tall metal fence that was topped with barbed wire. We decided to turn back after about 30 minutes of cycling. It was getting dark and we had no torches. When we returned, we were buzzing and decided that we had to do that again, but next time explore more of the path. 2 days later, we decided it's a good time to explore more of the path. The sun is beginning to set. It seems like the perfect time to set off. We begin cycling, however, this time things feel different. My friend is getting quite antsy. Further down the path we go, it gets even more so, and even I begin to get a bit freaked out. Something feels wrong, but we decide to carry on. Eventually, we come to this unexplored area, and by this point night had fallen and it's pitch black. We come across some kind of wooden electricity box. We stare at it for a second, and I try to see what's inside, but decide it's futile. We carry on. As soon as we pass that box, the off feeling becomes much worse. I come to a stop. I ask my friend if we should play some music from a well-known TV show that we both like, as the soundtrack would match the vibe of biking through unknown woods at night. You can probably guess what TV show it is, but anyways. Nope. She says yes, so I begin trying to get the music up on my Spotify. I had no signal, but that shouldn't have been an issue since I had the album downloaded, but it just wouldn't load. I was very absorbed in trying to get it to work, but after a minute my friend says in a nervous voice, "Is that coming from your phone?" Confused, I go silent. And then I hear it too. I can very faintly hear a song playing. The song is one that recently blew up because it was used in the TV show, and not only that, but the part of that's playing the chorus, which is not at the start of the song. Me and my friend both check our phones, but neither are playing anything. We both then book it back on our bikes. When we reach the edge of the woods, we both feel the vibes just kind of wash away instantly. When we got home, we both immediately checked any possible way the music came from our phones. We both asked our Siris to play that album, but they both say, "I need you to give me access to your Spotify," or something like that. We also checked multiple other things, but nothing was giving us any answers. We were both thoroughly freaked out, and especially my friend who's a skeptic and always disapproved of my stories and horror movies I'd tell her about. I'm a big horror fan. We went back to the path the next day. Even went back to the exact spot, and the vibes were completely gone. We could find no trace that any other person had been there. Also, some additional information. It was about 9:30ish when we heard the music. It was completely dark out, so if somebody was there, we wouldn't have been able to see them. However, we would have heard footsteps at least. The resort itself is close to an RAF base of some kind, and the music itself sounded quite reverby. Stopped pretty much as soon as we began booking it back, at least I think. Paranormal experience in a dream. Background information. My 27-year-old female granddad, alrighty then, died 25 years ago when I was 2.5. Okay, I'm assuming you, miss, are a 27-year-old female, and your granddad died 25 years ago when you were 2.5 years old. So, never really knew the person, just through stories that my parents and other family told me, the photographs of him that I've seen. So this dream happened a couple of weeks back now. It's really shaken me up a bit, and I dreamed I was at a garden party in the garden of the house my granny and granddad had owned when granddad was alive. Granny moved to a small ground floor flat after granddad died, and she didn't like being alone in a big house. I was sat on a garden bench next to my mother, chatting. That's when I saw the garden gate open. People I didn't recognize were walking through. They were dressed in white, and then walking amongst them I saw Grandpa. He saw me, and Mom came over to us. I remember we hugged, and it felt like such a real hug. It still feels real thinking back on it now. How tight he held me and how warm he felt. Kissed my cheek and told me how proud he was of me, and how well I'd grown up, and then he told my mom what a beautiful young lady I'd become. Then he said he was sorry that he couldn't stay longer, but he was so happy to have seen me now all grown up and that he's so proud of me and he loved me so much. I remember I told him I loved him too and started sobbing as we hugged again. Then I sat back down on the garden bench next to Mom and watched him as he disappeared into the crowd of people wearing white and headed towards the gate, and when I woke up, it felt like I'd been crying when I woke up as well. I couldn't feel any tears on my face, but I was breathing really heavily. I felt shaky. Any thoughts or opinions on why this would be appreciated? I don't really know whether to believe it was really Granddad visiting or not. I've had dreams about my late grandparents and my great-grandparents before, but not for a long time and not like this. They've always sort of been a dream based around a past memory of them, like a dream of helping Grandma make Sunday lunch. Never a conversation or meeting like this one. Haunted mirror in rental house. This happened 6 months ago in a house I moved into with a roommate. She had lived there for a year prior. Once I moved in, we started rearranging the living room. I need to note that there were old bedroom sets in the basement from the original owners of the house, bed frames and dressers and mirrors. Back to the living room, there was a mirror on the wall opposite the fireplace with a mirror above the mantel. The mirror opposite the fireplace came from the basement. It was hung up by the girl that lived there before I moved in. So I take the mirror off the wall, and as we're putting our TV in that spot and prop it up against the wall, perpendicular to the wall, it was hung until we can figure out where to put it. This is when we started to notice the weird things happening and hadn't quite realized the mirror could be the issue. There's a cot in the basement that was set up apparently by the owner of the house if he ever came to town. Weird in my opinion, but whatever. Well, the lights above the cot randomly stopped working, and that corner of the basement just started to have an eerie vibe. I tell my roommate this and we go down to investigate. What we found scared the shit out of us. Bare footprints on the cot seemingly pacing back and forth side to side. No one in their right mind would walk barefoot down there as it's dirty and there's been rats. We measured our feet next to the prints, and while roughly the same length, they were way too wide to be either of ours. A couple of days later, I'm down in the basement doing laundry. Make my dog come down here with me because it's so creepy. He wouldn't stop staring at that corner that was containing the cot. I felt I was being watched. A moment later, the lights above the washer and dryer started flickering, so I got the hell out of there. The same day later in the afternoon, I'm standing in the living room on the phone with my brother talking about work with my back to this mirror propped against the floor. My dog starts growling and aggressively barking. My initial thought was both mine and my roommate's dog were behind me fighting over a toy. So I snapped at them to stop, and I turned around and it was just my dog staring into the mirror. But he wasn't looking at his reflection. By the way, he's 5 years old and has seen his reflection thousands of times. It doesn't concern him. So that freaked me out. And that's when I started connecting dots. I had a betta fish in a tank on one side of the mirror. My roommate had a cool palm tree-like plant on the other side. My fish died suddenly and the plant wasn't doing well no matter her efforts. I have to note I had been telling my roommate that the mirror seemed warped because I felt I looked horrible and fat when I saw myself and walking into that room, and she apparently had also noticed this. So I bring my mirror theory to her, and she immediately grabs the mirror and puts it in our detached garage in the backyard. We both felt better about that the next day. Went out back to smoke and it was raining, so I opened the garage door for some shelter. A fluorescent bulb was on the floor in the middle of the garage as though it had fallen. But it was not in a place that would have seemingly landed and completely was unbroken. It's like someone laid it there. I had to look up, see the mirror facing me, and get the fuck out. Explained this to my roommate, and we immediately grabbed the mirror to walk it across the street to Goodwill. Super convenient in this moment. She was holding it by the wire it hung on for years. The moment it reached the edge of the property, the wire snaps. The mirror fell to the ground, without breaking. This thing did not want to leave. We get it across the street and leave it. The next day, the light in the basement started working, and we had no other weird experiences. Score. Little humanoids fishing. I grew up in a small town in the southern Oregon coast. There wasn't a whole lot for a teenager to do there, so we had to get a little bit creative. One of our favorite activities was to drive around and appreciate the raw natural beauty of the area, and explore the many trails, vistas, beaches, and such. We would greatly enhance the experience by taking a threshold dose, 100 UG of Lucy. This, of course, is not smart and could have gone horribly wrong. Lucy. UG. We were on a night voyage one time. A night voyage. There were 3 of us in my 91 Honda Accord, and we found ourselves in Crescent City, California at around 3 a.m. The town appeared eerily vacant as we aimlessly cruised its streets. Coastal fog blanketed the silent city. Suddenly, a massive beam of light level with the ground passed over us. About 50 feet into the air. Kept happening. Each time I could hear and feel it smoothly ripping through the sky. Filled with excitement, we began driving toward the source, which of course was a lighthouse. We all got out and enjoyed watching the beam for a while. Then we noticed a pier stretching out over the water. We walked down and onto the wooden pier and we noticed that we were not alone. About halfway down the pier was a group of 4 or 5 small figures. They were a little surprised to see anyone out there. We were all feeling spooked, but unable to make the decision to turn around, we kept walking. "Just act normal," said one of my friends. We awkwardly walked right past 3 figures. They were 4 feet tall at most, covered head to toe in a patchwork of brown fabric complete with hoods, face covers, and gloves. They carried with them some kind of woven baskets. They sound like Jawas. We were very spooked and my heart was racing, but they seemed even more agitated by our presence, making very odd click and squeak sounds to each other that kind of scrambled around us as we passed them. It was very odd, and we noticed that the pier was covered in sea life. There were fish flopping around us here and there, many crabs skittering around, and some of them finding their way over to the edge and back into the water. Fresh clumps of seaweed. None of us looked back for a while, and when we did, we saw that they were leaving. We watched, dumbfounded, as they exited the pier and all piled into a Ford Taurus station wagon and drove away. I can picture that. Relieved that they were gone, we all stood at the end of the pier for quite a while, discussing this weird situation while the beam continued circling the sky. We all had witnessed the same thing. We were high, but not hallucinating. Did our enhanced state of awareness allow us to see them when they're normally cloaked to normal humans? How did all of the sea life get up onto the pier? It was a good 10 feet off the water. Did they haul it out with a net and dump it onto the pier to collect with their wicker baskets? That would be really heavy for those little guys. But it seemed like, however they did do it, they were harvesting seafood. We referred to them afterwards as Ewoks, even though you wouldn't be able to tell if they were furry or not. That's why I said Jawas. Crescent City is surrounded by redwood forest, which is where Ewoks live, right? So, I don't know what they were, but they were very real. They didn't seem to be human. I feel like I should know most slang for drugs because I'm male. Lucy and UG of Lucy. Since I don't know exactly what drug that is, and you're seeing anything from Star Wars in real life, I might want to blame it on those drugs that you were doing. Who knows? The ghost encounter that made me believe. This happened about a decade ago. I was 18 at the time. I was dating a boy for about a month, and we're going to call him B. B was also completely dismissive of the idea that ghosts are real. Even more dismissive than I was. He thought the idea of religion, spirits, aliens, etc. were all bizarre fantasies. About a month into our relationship, he decided it was time I met his parents. I, being a gothic quote-unquote teen, was extremely nervous, but I reluctantly agreed. He picked me up and drove us to his apartment to meet them. Upon walking through the front door, his mother sat on the couch with her 2 dogs, which were Chihuahuas, one brown and one black, and to the left of me and his father stood in the kitchen entryway to the right of me. He introduced me, and we made pleasant small talk. I was so focused on the conversation and my nerves that I hardly noticed the dogs barking. That was at least until his mother yelled, "Quiet!" to stop him. We chatted for about 20 minutes, then headed out for our weekend plans. About a week later, he invited me over again. His parents weren't home, and upon arriving, I noticed only one dog was there. The dog was less timid this time, so I bent down to pet her. B told me her name and a bit of her backstory, how they adopted her and all that. I then asked him about the black dog and how he got a puzzled look in his face. What black dog? The one that was here the last time? It looks just like this one, only it's black. Belle was the only dog here. He looked at me in pure disbelief and told me they'd had a dog like that, but it had died a few months ago. I told him the dog had a white stripe down its chest and a blue collar with a bow on it, and his jaw hit the floor. He led me down the hallway and showed me a photo on the wall of the 2 dogs together, and my description perfectly matched it. A photo that could not be seen from the front door where I had stood during my entire last visit, by the way. We tried for a solid hour to make this make sense. I couldn't have gotten every single detail right down to the collar. It wasn't something seen from the corner of my eye. I stared right at this dog for 20 solid minutes. It was hardly 5 feet away from me. It was coming up occasionally to sniff my shoes and barking as any dog would at a newcomer, and, well, I undoubtedly saw this dog. And to this day, I can see the scene in my mind very clearly. I don't have any history of mental illness or hallucinations, and I've never experienced anything like this. There was nothing strange about its appearance. It was really pretty clear. It wasn't floating or any of that. Looked like any dog, except somehow it wasn't there and nobody saw it but me. During our relationship, we would often recall that experience and how strange it was. 10 years later, I still rack my brain trying to make it make sense, and it just doesn't. Have any of you ever seen a ghost, or specifically a ghost of an animal? Or had anybody had an experience like this one? I've questioned my sanity for a decade because of this experience. Unexplainable bathroom light at 3:33 a.m. Yesterday morning at 3:33 a.m. exactly, I was laying in bed with my boyfriend. And earlier that night in the car, we were having a discussion on whether we believed in ghosts and how they'd appear and whatnot, and we both agreed that we have a sense there's some kind of paranormal, but didn't go much deeper with it. We were hanging out in bed and we were getting ready to sleep, and that's when I heard the click of the bathroom door. I kept telling him I heard the knob click shut, and he kept telling me he remembers shutting it. The bathroom door is right across from my bedroom, so I was staring at it and the light was on the inside. I could see through the outline of the door, and I remember using the bathroom, and I'm forgetful sometimes about closing the door and shutting the light off, so can't really remember the state of the bathroom, but I knew I heard a click. He kept assuring me that he shut it. My cats were being loud, but they weren't by the bathroom. As I kept telling him about it, I looked away for a split second and heard another click, but it was the sound the light makes. I looked back, and the light was now off. I no longer saw this outline. I was scared as shit, so I grabbed my phone because I thought there was possibly an intruder. The time was exactly 3:33 a.m. I know it's silly, but it seemed so odd and the air felt so uncomfortable. I kept believing there might be somebody in there, somehow thinking logically after 5 minutes of panicking. We found items in the room to defend ourselves with, turned on all the lights outside the bathroom, then opened the door to discover an empty bathroom. I've been living in this apartment since July, never witnessing anything off other than the feeling of being scared when he... I've been living in this apartment since July, never witnessing anything off other than feeling kind of scared when he doesn't stay the night with me and having nightmares. Excuse me. The person in which I took over the lease never mentioned nothing spooky happening, but it is sort of an older complex that was renovated. I've only ever woken up at 3:33 once while staying at a friend's house. And the feeling eerie because it's the spooky hour. Plus, I remember vividly having a weird dream that woke me up, but don't remember the details. Anyone else have word occurrences of this hour? I feel crazy as hell. Did I see a ghost? So I work in a hospital doing MRIs. And every day our patient list consists of inpatients and outpatients. The MRI room is located directly next to the CT room along a corridor that also has rooms for fluoroscopy, DEXA scans, all that stuff. This corridor is maybe 20 feet long, maybe a little longer. So CT brought an elderly patient down, and all the staff along the corridor can see her. Everybody can see that she obviously isn't well. She's not screaming or in pain or anything, just very quiet with glazed over eyes, not really moving. She's very wild hair and sort of sticks up in all directions. So I go about my business, checking on all the other patients and whatnot, and getting them checklisted, which takes 5-7 minutes per person. And as I'm walking back into the office, I see a crash team running toward me, heading toward the CT room. At this point, I couldn't see the elderly lady anymore. I hear a commotion. I couldn't tell at the time exactly what was happening, but it turns out that the elderly patient had passed away in the table as they were positioning her and preparing her for her scan. Everyone in the scanning area is a little bit distressed, but gets on with their work. We eventually finish scanning our last outpatient, and I'm shutting down the department and getting everything ready for the next day. Gonna get more gowns from along the corridor. And as I go to leave and walk past the CT room, at this point it's just me and 2 other colleagues, I and another colleague hear a sound of the hospital bed wheels approaching our area. Apart from the 3 of us, the department is empty. Me and the other guy both turn around, and at the end of the corridor we see a figure standing there. It's not moving. It has the same wild hair as the elderly lady. Now, I'm not really a superstitious person, but this really did get to me and my colleagues. No one should be there apart from the 3 of us, but we can see each other and know where each other are. We went back into the MRI room and questioned what we saw. We all saw a figure. We all recognized the hair. We all saw something or someone standing still. We decided that it was best to leave the MRI room. We did this together because we were a little bit shaken. When we head back out, there's no one there, but the lights are off along the whole corridor. From the very top, past the imaging rooms, including CT, leading to our department, the 3 of us decide to leave our bags and other belongings in the lockers and head straight to security to ask if they'd seen anything, which they said they hadn't. They escort us back in, we grab our bits with lightning speed and hightail it out of there. As I mentioned, I'm not a superstitious person. I wouldn't say I believe in ghosts per se, but I have no other explanation as to what I saw. Could it have just been my mind playing tricks on me after a long and stressful shift? I saw her literally minutes before she died, and could it have been her spirit lingering? I work there and haven't seen anything else, but walking past CT gets my heart going. It makes me feel physically sick. I'm with you on the feeling physically sick. But I'm still here and chugging along. Hope you guys are too. Sweet dreams. See ya.